The November fog pressed against the windows of 221B Baker Street like the breath of some primordial beast, and I had just settled into my evening reading when the urgent clatter of hooves upon cobblestone announced an arrival that would shatter our domestic tranquility. Holmes, who had been examining a peculiar stain upon a handkerchief through his magnifying glass, lifted his aquiline profile toward the sound with that expression of keen anticipation I had come to know so well. A four-wheeler, Watson, and driven with considerable haste, through weather that would deter all but the most desperate of souls. Before I could respond, Mrs. Hudson's hurried footsteps echoed upon the stairs, followed by a sharp rap upon our door. The woman who entered was perhaps 30 years of age, wrapped in a dark travelling cloak that bore the damp of London's perpetual mist. Her face pale with an anxiety that spoke of recent shock. She moved with the practiced grace of one accustomed to the stage, yet her hands trembled as she removed her gloves. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, forgive this intrusion at such an hour, but I come on behalf of Mr. Cornelius Ashford, manager of the Adelphi Theatre, who finds himself in circumstances so extraordinary that even Scotland Yard has declared the matter beyond their comprehension." Holmes gestured toward the chair beside the fire with characteristic economy of movement. "Pray be seated, Miss Pembroke, sir. Miss Catherine Pembroke. I serve as assistant to Mr. Ashford and have witnessed events that defy all rational explanation." She accepted the offered chair, though she perched upon its edge as if prepared for immediate flight. 3 nights passed, during our production of The Merchant's Daughter. Our leading man, Mr. Julian Fairfax, vanished from the stage during the final act. Not merely disappeared, you understand, but vanished in full view of 400 spectators, leaving behind only his costume and a pool of what the police surgeon has declared to be human blood. Holmes leaned forward, his grey eyes sharpening with interest. The circumstances of this disappearance? Mr. Fairfax was performing the climactic sword fight with our villain, Mr. Reginald Morse. The scene requires both men to duel behind a large tapestry that conceals them from the audience, while stagehands create the sounds of combat. When the tapestry was drawn back to reveal the victor, Mr. Morse stood alone, his sword bloodied, staring in bewilderment at an empty stage. Mr. Fairfax's costume lay in a heap, as if he had simply dissolved within it, leaving behind only his garments and that terrible stain upon the boards. I found myself leaning forward despite my better judgment. But surely there must be some explanation, a trapdoor perhaps, or some mechanism of theatrical illusion. Miss Pembroke shook her head with vehement certainty. The stage was examined by Mr. Ashford himself, then by Inspector Gregson and his men. There are no trapdoors. In that section, no concealed passages, no means by which a man might escape unseen. The tapestry was suspended from above by ropes that showed no signs of tampering, and the space behind it measured barely 6 feet square. Mr. Morse swears upon his mother's grave that he struck no blow, that his sword found only empty air, yet the blade bore fresh blood when the curtain fell. Holmes rose and moved to the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the gaslight filtering through the fog. This Mr. Fairfax, his character, his circumstances. A gentleman of impeccable reputation, sir, though perhaps given to melancholy of late. His wife had died of consumption some months prior, and he had spoken to several members of the company of his profound grief. Yet he showed no signs of distress that evening, performed his role with customary excellence until that final, terrible moment. And Mr. Morse, a competent actor, though one who harbored professional jealousy toward Mr. Fairfax's superior position in the company. He has been questioned extensively, but maintains his innocence with such genuine bewilderment that even Inspector Gregson believes his protestations. Holmes turned from the window, and I saw upon his features that expression of intense concentration that invariably preceded his most brilliant deductions. "Miss Pembroke, I believe you're Mr. Ashford's faith in my abilities may yet prove justified. Watson, our coats, the Adelphi, awaits, and with it, perhaps, a mystery worthy of our most careful attention. The hansom cab bore us through London's fog-shrouded streets, the gaslight struggling against the November gloom like dying embers in a vast hearth. Holmes sat opposite Miss Pembroke, his keen eyes studying her with that peculiar intensity I had learned to recognize. "You handle fabric daily," he observed quietly. "Yet your fingers show the calluses of one who works with coarse hemp and canvas rather than fine silk. Stage management requires more practical skills than most audiences imagine." Miss Pembroke started slightly at this unexpected observation, confirming Holmes's deduction, while I marveled once again at his ability to read character from the smallest details. The Adelphi Theatre emerged from the mist like some grand monument to human ambition, its classical facade adorned with columns that seemed to support the very weight of artistic endeavor. Despite the late hour, light spilled from several windows, suggesting the building's inhabitants had found sleep elusive since the inexplicable events of 3 nights past. Mr. Cornelius Ashford awaited us in the foyer, a man of perhaps 50 years whose theatrical bearing could not entirely conceal his genuine distress. His silver hair was disheveled, his usually immaculate evening dress wrinkled from what appeared to have been hours of anxious pacing. "Mr. Holmes, thank Providence you have come," he declared, his voice carrying the trained projection of one accustomed to addressing large audiences. "In 30 years of theatrical management, I have witnessed every conceivable mishap, yet nothing has prepared me for events so thoroughly inexplicable. Inspector Gregson has examined every inch of the stage and declared himself baffled." We followed Ashford through corridors lined with theatrical posters and photographs of past productions, the walls whispering with the ghosts of 1,000 performances. The backstage area revealed itself as a labyrinth of ropes and pulleys, painted scenery and costume racks, all bathed in the eerie half-light of safety lamps that cast dancing shadows upon every surface. The stage stretched before us like a vast wooden sea, its boards worn smooth by countless entrances and exits. Holmes moved immediately to the area behind the crimson velvet tapestry, his movements precise and methodical. The bloodstain marked the boards like some sinister signature, dark and irregular in shape, while the abandoned costume lay nearby in a configuration that defied natural explanation. "Watson, observe the positioning of these garments," Holmes murmured, kneeling beside the pile. "Note how they have fallen not as if hastily removed, but as if the wearer had simply dissolved within them. The boots stand upright, the shirt retains the outline of shoulders and arms. Most peculiar." He produced his magnifying glass and examined the bloodstain with scientific precision, then turned his attention to the floorboards themselves. With his penknife, he carefully extracted something from between 2 planks, a tiny fragment of green glass, no larger than a pinhead. "Curious," he murmured, holding it to the light. "This glass is of a particular composition, likely from a small vial or bottle. Mr. Ashford, do any of your stage effects require such vessels?" "None whatsoever, Mr. Holmes. We use only the standard theatrical properties." Holmes next examined the tapestry's hanging mechanism, running his fingers along the ropes with the delicacy of a musician tuning an instrument. "This rope has been recently spliced," he announced, indicating a section where newer hemp had been woven into the older cord. "The work was done within the last week, I should estimate." "Impossible," Ashford protested. "That tapestry has hung unchanged for months. Nevertheless, the evidence is unmistakable." Holmes knelt and pressed his ear to the floorboards, tapping gently with his knuckles. In one particular spot, the sound rang hollow. "There is space beneath this section of stage, not uncommon in theaters of this vintage, but significant nonetheless." At that moment, Inspector Gregson emerged from the wings, his fair whiskers bristling with frustration. "Mr. Holmes, I had hoped you might shed light on this impossible business. We have examined every inch of this stage, and found no conceivable means of escape. Holmes rose, brushing dust from his knees, his eyes bright with the light of discovery. Inspector, impossibility is merely another word for insufficient observation. Mr. Ashford, I shall require a complete list of everyone with access to this theatre, and I must speak with your carpenter immediately. The truth lies not in what we see, but in what has been carefully concealed. The carpenter arrived within minutes, a weathered man named Thomas Hartwell, whose calloused hands bore the permanent stains of wood glue and varnish. He approached with the cautious deference of one accustomed to being summoned when theatrical disasters struck, his lined face creased with concern beneath iron-grey hair. Holmes wasted no time on pleasantries, directing the man's attention to the spliced rope above the tapestry. You performed this repair recently, Mr. Hartwell. Describe the circumstances that necessitated such work. Hartwell's eyes widened with surprise before narrowing suspiciously. How could you possibly know that, sir? The work was completed 6 days past, and I told no one save Mr. Ashford. His gaze shifted nervously between Holmes and the theatre manager. One of the ropes had developed a dangerous fray near the pulley mechanism. I received written orders to replace the entire section immediately. Written orders? Holmes's voice carried that particular sharpness I had learned to recognize. From whom, precisely? Why, from Mr. Ashford's office, sir. Clear instructions on theatre letterhead, signed proper and delivered by the call boy. Hartwell glanced at Ashford, whose face had grown pale. You said the safety of the company depended upon immediate action. Ashford shook his head vigorously. I issued no such order, Mr. Hartwell. I would certainly remember authorizing repairs to critical stage equipment. Holmes knelt once more beside the hollow-sounding boards, his long fingers tracing the wood grain with practiced precision. These boards have been recently disturbed. The nail heads show fresh scratches, and the dust between joints is lighter than the surrounding areas. What lies beneath this section, Mr. Hartwell? Storage space, sir, though it hasn't been accessed in years. Too cramped for anything save emergency repairs to the foundation. The carpenter produced a heavy iron key from his pocket. There's an access panel behind the stage left curtain, though I can't imagine why anyone would venture into such a confined space. We followed Hartwell to a narrow door concealed behind the heavy drapery, its surface painted black to blend invisibly with the surrounding framework. The key turned with reluctant protest, revealing wooden stairs descending into absolute darkness. Holmes immediately produced his electric torch, its beam cutting through the gloom to illuminate a cramped space perhaps 4 feet in height, extending beneath the entire stage area. The air hung thick with accumulated mustiness, yet I detected another scent, something sharp and chemical that seemed oddly out of place in these forgotten depths. Holmes moved with purposeful determination toward the area directly beneath where Fairfax had vanished, his light playing across rough wooden supports and stone foundation. There, wedged between 2 massive oak beams, lay evidence that made my pulse quicken. Fresh boot prints in the dust, a torn fragment of black silk caught on a splinter, and most tellingly, the unmistakable sweet odor of chloroform lingering in the stagnant air. Someone has been here recently, Holmes observed, his voice echoing in the confined space. Note these parallel scratches in the beam overhead marks left by the installation and subsequent removal of mechanical apparatus. The bolt holes remain visible, though the device itself has been carefully eliminated. Inspector Gregson, who had followed us into the cramped space, examined the evidence with growing excitement. Are you suggesting Fairfax was somehow transported through this underground passage? I am suggesting, Holmes replied, pocketing the silk fragment, that Mr. Fairfax's disappearance, while certainly dramatic, was far from supernatural. The question now becomes not how he vanished, but who possessed both the theatrical knowledge and mechanical skill to orchestrate such an elaborate deception. As we emerged from the dusty depths, Holmes's expression carried that look of grim satisfaction I had learned to associate with the unraveling of complex conspiracies. The game, as they say, was indeed afoot. Ascending from the dusty confines beneath the stage, Holmes immediately directed his attention to the blood-stained boards with renewed intensity, his magnifying glass catching the gaslight as he examined the crimson evidence with scientific precision. The stain's pattern struck me as peculiar, too uniform in its distribution, lacking the chaotic spray one might expect from genuine combat. "Watson, observe the geometric regularity of these droplets," he murmured, his voice carrying that particular satisfaction I had learned to associate with breakthrough moments. This blood was not spilled in the heat of battle, but applied with deliberate care. Inspector Gregson produced the sword that had been taken from Morse's trembling hands on that fateful evening, its blade still bearing the dark traces that had so confounded the police surgeon. Holmes accepted the weapon with reverent care, his keen eyes immediately detecting what others had missed. With practiced movements, he unscrewed what appeared to be a decorative pommel cap, revealing a hollow chamber within the sword's hilt. "Ingenious," he declared, extracting with his tweezers a tiny fragment of green glass, identical to the one discovered between the floorboards. A reservoir designed to release blood upon command, creating the illusion of mortal combat without inflicting actual harm. The implications of this discovery sent a visible shudder through our assembled company. Mr. Ashford's face had grown ashen, while Miss Pembroke pressed her handkerchief to her lips in obvious distress. If the blood had been mechanically applied, then Fairfax's disappearance was not the result of supernatural forces or tragic accident, but a carefully orchestrated deception requiring both theatrical knowledge and mechanical expertise. "Summon the call boy," Holmes commanded, his tone brooking no delay. Within moments, a nervous youth of perhaps 14 years stood before us, his cap twisted between anxious fingers. Young Timothy Finch possessed the quick, darting eyes of one accustomed to navigating the complex hierarchies of theatrical life. Yet, his current pallor suggested he understood the gravity of recent events. "The message you delivered to Mr. Hartwell," Holmes began with surprising gentleness, recognizing the boy's obvious fear. "Describe the person who gave it to you, omitting no detail, however insignificant it may seem." Timothy's voice quavered as he spoke. "A lady, sir, though strange in her manner. She wore a heavy veil that concealed her features entirely, and her voice was uncommonly deep, almost masculine in its timbre. What struck me most was her pronounced limp. She favored her left leg considerably and walked with a silver-headed cane. She pressed a whole shilling into my palm and insisted the message was of utmost urgency." Holmes exchanged a meaningful glance with Inspector Gregson. A disguised figure with intimate knowledge of theater operations suggested someone within their immediate circle, yet the physical description matched no one currently present. "This veiled woman," he continued, "had you encountered her before in the theater?" "Never in such garb, sir, though." Timothy hesitated, his young face creased with uncertainty. There had been talk among the company of a mysterious lady who visited Mr. Fairfax in recent weeks, always after evening performances, always heavily veiled, speaking with him privately in his dressing room. The other actors whispered of a romantic entanglement, though none could identify her with certainty. Miss Pembroke stepped forward, her composure momentarily shaken. "I can confirm young Timothy's account, Mr. Holmes. This woman possessed an elegant bearing despite her concealment, and she wore garments of obvious quality. What lingered most distinctly was her perfume, jasmine and bergamot, a scent so distinctive it remained in the corridors long after her departure." Holmes produced the torn fragment of black silk from his waistcoat, holding it to the light where its quality became immediately apparent. "Italian silk of the finest grade," he announced with certainty. "Where? The weave suggests a garment of considerable expense, far beyond the means of most theatrical folk." His grey eyes sharpened as the implications crystallized. "We are dealing not with common criminality, but with someone of means and sophistication who possessed both intimate knowledge of Mr. Fairfax's circumstances and access to the theatre's inner workings." The web of deception was becoming clearer, yet the central question remained. What had become of Julian Fairfax himself, and who among London's elite possessed both motive and opportunity for such an elaborate charade? Holmes's request to examine Fairfax's dressing room was granted immediately, and we followed Mr. Ashford through the narrow backstage corridors where the lingering sense of grease paint and powder created that peculiar atmosphere unique to theatrical establishments. The actor's private sanctuary remained undisturbed since that fateful evening, a frozen tableau of interrupted routine that spoke volumes to my companion's trained eye. The modest chamber contained the usual appointments of a leading man's quarters. A gilt-framed mirror surrounded by gas jets, a washstand bearing the remnants of evening ablutions, and costume pieces hanging from wooden pegs like abandoned personas. Yet it was the subtler details that commanded Holmes's immediate attention. The air still carried traces of that distinctive perfume Miss Pembroke had described, jasmine and bergamot, lingering with such persistence that our mysterious visitor's presence seemed almost tangible. Holmes moved with characteristic precision, his keen gaze cataloguing every surface with methodical care. Upon the dressing table lay scattered correspondence, bills from theatrical suppliers, and personal letters bearing the usual condolences following his wife's passing. Among these mundane papers, however, one envelope commanded particular attention. Heavy cream stationery of obvious quality, its surface bearing a watermark visible only when held to the gaslight. "Observe, Watson," Holmes murmured, extracting the letter with delicate care. "The paper bears a coronet above the initial V, suggesting correspondence from someone of noble birth or pretension thereto." The message itself was brief yet tantalizing. "The arrangements proceed as discussed. Wednesday evening shall mark our new beginning. Trust in my devotion as you have trusted in mine. V." The handwriting displayed an educated feminine script, though certain letter formations suggested deliberate disguise. More intriguing still was the date, the very day of Fairfax's disappearance. Inspector Gregson examined the evidence with growing excitement, though I detected in Holmes's expression that reservation which indicated deeper complexities lay hidden beneath these apparent revelations. Kneeling beside the dressing table, Holmes discovered what his trained eye had detected from the doorway, faint impressions in the carpet's nap where a walking stick had repeatedly struck. "Note the pattern, Watson." 2 impressions close together, then a third slightly forward, indicating someone who required frequent rest while standing. The depth suggests a silver or brass ferrule of considerable weight. Young Timothy appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with excitement. "Begging pardon, sirs, but a telegram arrived for Mr. Fairfax not 20 minutes past." He handed Holmes the yellow paper with trembling fingers. The message proved illuminating. Specialized apparatus delivered and installed as requested. Payment received. Await collection instructions. Henderson, Bermondsey. Holmes studied the routing information with intense concentration, his gray eyes brightening as patterns emerged from apparent chaos. "Henderson," he announced to our assembled company, "operates a workshop specializing in theatrical mechanisms. His establishment is renowned for creating elaborate stage effects requiring both engineering expertise and discretion." He turned to Mr. Ashford with renewed intensity. "Has Fairfax ever commissioned such specialized equipment?" "Not through official theater channels," Ashford replied hesitantly, though actors occasionally arrange private commissions to enhance their performances. Holmes pocketed both letter and telegram, then conducted a final examination of the room's corners and crevices. Wedged beneath the dressing table's base lay a small brass key of unusual design, its intricate teeth suggesting specialized purpose. The metal bore the distinctive patina of frequent handling, yet its function remained tantalizingly mysterious. "The evidence suggests a conspiracy of considerable sophistication," Holmes observed, his voice carrying that particular satisfaction I had learned to associate with breakthrough moments. Our mysterious lady possessed not only intimate knowledge of Mr. Fairfax's circumstances, but also the resources to commission specialized mechanical apparatus. The question now becomes whether our vanished actor was victim or willing participant in his own spectacular disappearance. The web of deception was becoming clearer. Yet the central mystery remained. What had become of Julian Fairfax? And what powerful motive could justify such an elaborate theatrical charade? The journey to Henderson's workshop required traversing London's industrial heart, where the November fog grew thicker as our hansom cab approached the Thames's murky waters. Bermondsey's narrow streets wound between warehouses and manufacturing establishments, their smoking chimneys disappearing into the grey vault above, like fingers grasping at heaven. Holmes maintained his characteristic silence during our passage, his sharp profile etched against the window as he studied the brass key with that intensity I had learned to associate with breakthrough moments. Henderson's establishment occupied a converted warehouse whose grimy exterior gave little indication of the specialized craftsmanship within. As we approached the entrance, however, it became immediately apparent that all was not well. The door stood ajar, and through the gap came the sound of labored breathing and muffled groans. Holmes raised his hand for silence, tested the latch, and found it completely unfastened. We entered upon a scene of recent violence. The workshop, normally a testament to mechanical ingenuity with its lathes and pulleys, bore clear signs of hasty search. Tools lay scattered across workbenches, drawers hung open with their contents spilled, and the air carried that sharp, medicinal scent of chloroform that we had detected beneath the Adelphi's stage. A groan from the rear office drew us to where a stout man with salt and pepper whiskers lay bound to a chair, his oil-stained apron bearing dark spots that spoke of rough handling. Inspector Gregson immediately set about cutting his bonds, while Holmes examined the ropework with clinical precision. "Sailor's clove hitch over a running bowline," he observed quietly. The work of someone familiar with both nautical and theatrical rigging. Henderson accepted my water flask gratefully, his weathered hands trembling as he dabbed at a cut above his temple. "Set upon not 30 minutes past, gentlemen. 2 of them, a woman who moved with surprising agility despite her walking stick, and a companion who spoke little but searched with methodical purpose." His eyes fixed upon Holmes with growing recognition. "You would be the consulting detective, I warrant. They asked specifically whether you had yet made inquiries regarding a certain theatrical commission." Holmes's nostrils flared almost imperceptibly. "The lady bore the scent of jasmine and bergamot?" At Henderson's nod of confirmation, my companion moved to examine the doorframe where a fragment of dark silk clung to a splinter. "Our veiled visitor has extended her patronage beyond mere observation. She wished to review the apparatus one final time," Henderson continued, wincing as he adjusted his position. "Claimed the original specifications required modification, though I suspected her true purpose was ensuring no evidence remained of our transaction." He gestured toward his violated workspace. "They sought my records, my drawings, anything that might connect the commission to its true sponsors." Holmes produced the brass key discovered in Fairfax's quarters. "Does this unlock any component of your mechanism?" Henderson's eyes widened with immediate recognition. "Indeed, sir. That key operates the master control for the entire apparatus. Without it, the mechanism cannot be activated safely." He struggled to his feet, leading us toward a corner where a large crate bore the stenciled marking, "Apparatus B, Client Fairfax." "The lady insisted upon a backup system, you understand. Should anything go amiss during operation, that key would allow immediate release of the occupant." Holmes applied the key to a brass hasp securing the crate, and the lock opened with an oiled whisper. Within lay the anatomy of theatrical illusion. Polished cables, counterweighted pulleys, and a narrow wooden frame bearing fresh screw holes that matched precisely the bolt patterns we had observed beneath the Adelphi's stage. Most intriguing was a leather harness, whose buckles showed traces of chalk dust, the same substance used by stagehands to ensure secure grips. "The mechanism operates on principles of counterbalanced weight distribution," Henderson explained, his professional pride overcoming his recent ordeal. "The subject is lowered through modified floorboards into a padded chamber, then transported horizontally through existing structural spaces before being raised at a predetermined location. The entire sequence can be completed in under 2 minutes. Holmes lifted a rolled plan from beneath the apparatus components, its surface bearing precise annotations in a delicate feminine hand. The drawings revealed not merely the mechanical aspects of the device, but detailed measurements of the Adelphi's underground spaces, suggesting reconnaissance conducted over considerable time. "Your payment," Holmes inquired, "came from whom?" "Precisely." Henderson produced a visiting card from his waistcoat, its cream-colored surface bearing an understated coronet above the initial V. "The Viscountess Vale of Eaton Square," he read aloud. "Payment was rendered in full, with generous additional compensation for discretion." The lady made it quite clear that absolute secrecy was essential to her purposes. Before Holmes could respond further, rapid footsteps announced the arrival of a constable whose flushed face spoke of urgent news. "Inspector Gregson, sir." Message from the Adelphi Theatre. "The carpenter Hartwell has been found beneath the stage, strangled with fine wire." A card was pinned to the tapestry with a silver-headed pin, bearing the message, "The dead must learn their cues." Holmes's expression hardened, and I saw his hand close unconsciously around the brass key, as though it were a weapon rather than evidence. The game had taken a decidedly sinister turn, transforming what might have been elaborate theatrical deception into something far more deadly. "So," he said quietly, his gray eyes reflecting the gaslight like polished steel, "our mysterious patroness has decided that witnesses pose an unacceptable risk. The grave beneath the stage lights has claimed its first true victim. And, I fear, Mr. Fairfax's fate grows more precarious with each passing hour. Our return to the Adelphi Theatre through London's fog-shrouded streets carried with it the weight of escalating violence, transforming what had begun as an intriguing puzzle into something far more sinister. The constables had cordoned off the stage area, their lanterns casting eerie shadows that danced across the wooden boards like spectres of past performances. Dr. Mortimer, the police surgeon, knelt beside Hartwell's lifeless form with the grim efficiency of one accustomed to violent death. Yet even his professional composure seemed shaken by the theatrical precision of the crime scene. Holmes approached the body with that characteristic blend of scientific detachment and intense focus that I had witnessed countless times, his magnifying glass revealing details that escaped less trained observers. The carpenter lay positioned beneath the very tapestry where Fairfax had vanished, his body arranged with an almost ceremonial precision that spoke of calculated symbolism rather than hasty murder. "Piano wire," Holmes announced after examining the ligature marks with clinical thoroughness. "Specifically manufactured for concert instruments, requiring considerable strength and expertise to apply with such lethal efficiency." The silver-headed pin that secured the threatening message proved equally illuminating. Holmes extracted it with delicate care, holding the ornate head to the gaslight, where intricate engravings became visible. "Observe the craftsmanship, Watson. This bears the authentic heraldic markings of an established noble house, the letter V, surrounded by a coronet of distinctive design. Our adversary has abandoned all pretense of anonymity." Inspector Gregson produced Henderson's visiting card, comparing the coronet designs with growing excitement, yet Holmes's expression remained troubled rather than triumphant. "Consider the paradox before us," he mused, his keen mind detecting inconsistencies that escaped our immediate notice. Why would someone capable of orchestrating such elaborate deception suddenly abandon all caution? The careful anonymity maintained throughout this conspiracy dissolves into brazen identification at the moment of greatest risk. Miss Pembroke, who had observed our investigation with growing anxiety, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Holmes, there is something I have withheld, though I fear it may cast suspicion upon someone dear to our company." Her voice trembled as she continued. "Mr. Reginald Morse has been secretly involved with a lady of quality for several months past. He spoke of her only in whispers, describing her distinctive limp and her preference for heavy veils when visiting the theatre. Most significantly, she had provided him with expensive gifts, including a silver-headed walking stick bearing an engraved coronet. The implications struck with the force of revelation. Holmes moved immediately to examine the exact position Morse had occupied during that fateful performance. His movements replicating the sword fight choreography, with precise attention to angles and timing. The position affords perfect concealment of any activity occurring behind the tapestry, he observed, his grey eyes reflecting the gaslight like polished steel. An accomplice could have operated Henderson's mechanism, while Morse maintained the illusion of combat. At that moment, young Timothy burst through the stage door, his face bearing the flush of both exertion and terror. "Mr. Holmes, sir, terrible news from Mr. Morse's lodgings. He's been found unconscious, his rooms ransacked, and that precious walking stick missing entirely." The constables discovered another note, pinned to his pillow with an identical silver pin bearing the message, "The final performance awaits." Holmes's expression darkened as the pattern emerged with crystalline clarity. Our adversary was eliminating witnesses with methodical precision, yet something in the sequence troubled him profoundly. He knelt once more beside Hartwell's body, his fingers tracing the rope marks with surgical precision. "Note the technique, Watson." A sailor's clove hitch over a running bowline, the work of someone familiar with both nautical and theatrical rigging. The glove impressions show chalk dust for grip and machine lubricant on the fingertips. Two distinct sets of footprints, a boot with sailor's cut heel and a narrower shoe with beveled edge. From the dusty floor beneath the stage supports, Holmes extracted a minute shaving, of bright metal. Examining it against the gaslight with intense concentration, silvered nickel from a ferrule, freshly abraded where it struck the beam in haste. His investigation revealed additional evidence. A fragment of the same fine wire used upon Hartwell, kinked at one end as if hastily severed, and the lingering trace of jasmine and bergamot that had become the mysterious lady's unwitting signature. The theatrical nature of each crime suggests intimate knowledge of dramatic convention, Holmes observed, his voice carrying that particular gravity I had learned to associate with dangerous revelations. Yet the execution displays ruthless efficiency that speaks of professional training far beyond amateur theatrics. We are dealing with someone who possesses both aristocratic resources and access to individuals capable of extreme violence. He turned to Inspector Gregson with renewed urgency, his instructions falling like precise notes from a conductor's baton. Double the guard upon Henderson and ensure Mr. Morse receives immediate medical attention under protective custody. Our adversary has demonstrated a willingness to eliminate anyone who might compromise their elaborate design, and we must assume that list includes anyone who has assisted in our investigation. The brass key from Fairfax's dressing room seemed to pulse with significance in Holmes's palm as he contemplated our next move. "The Viscountess Vale of Eaton Square represents either our final answer or our greatest deception," he declared, his grey eyes bright with the light of impending resolution. "Yet we must approach with utmost caution, for we are no longer pursuing mere theatrical illusion, but confronting someone who has already demonstrated their willingness to kill in service of whatever dark purpose drives this elaborate charade." The journey to Eaton Square, through London's fog-shrouded streets, carried an atmosphere of mounting anticipation. Each gas lamp struggling against the November gloom like dying embers in a vast hearth. Holmes sat opposite me in the hansom cab, his sharp profile etched against the window as he studied the brass key with that intensity I had learned to associate with the moments before breakthrough. The escalating violence had transformed our theatrical mystery into something far more deadly, yet I detected in my companion's manner that peculiar satisfaction which indicated the scattered pieces of our puzzle were finally beginning to form a coherent picture. "Consider the paradox before us, Watson," Holmes murmured, his grey eyes reflecting the passing streetlights. The theatricality of the disappearance, the bloodied sword, the notes pinned with heraldic insignia all point to someone with profound appreciation for dramatic effect. Yet the brutal efficiency of Hartwell's murder and the attack upon Morse speak of cold, calculating ruthlessness. The two elements seem incongruous, like a sonnet written in blood. The Viscountess Vale's residence emerged from the mist like a monument to aristocratic privilege, its Georgian facade adorned with columns and ornate ironwork that spoke of wealth accumulated over generations. Yet something in its appearance struck me as peculiar even before Holmes voiced his observations. The windows remained uniformly dark despite the early morning hour, and no smoke rose from the numerous chimneys that crowned its elegant roofline. Holmes approached the imposing front door with characteristic caution, his keen eyes noting details that escaped my immediate observation. Observe. Watson, the brass nameplate bears the expected inscription, yet the metal shows signs of recent installation, lacking the patina one would expect from years of London weather. He knelt to examine wheel marks in the courtyard, his magnifying glass revealing fresh impressions. A light brougham with rubber tires, one imperfectly trued, so the impression wavers at regular intervals. French manufacture and recent arrival. The mud is of Horseferry Road, not this square. Our knock echoed through what seemed an empty house, the sound reverberating with that hollow quality suggesting abandoned spaces. After several minutes without response, Holmes produced his lockpicks, though the mechanism yielded far more easily than anticipated. Curious, he observed, examining the tumblers. This lock has been deliberately compromised, the springs weakened and pins filed to accept almost any key of appropriate size. The interior revealed itself as an elaborate stage set rather than a genuine residence, its elegant furnishings arranged with theatrical precision, yet lacking the accumulated details that mark authentic habitation. The drawing room contained expensive furniture positioned for maximum visual impact, yet the surfaces bore no dust patterns, suggesting regular use. And the fireplace showed no evidence of recent fires, despite November's bitter cold. Holmes moved through the rooms with methodical precision, his trained eye cataloguing inconsistencies that painted a picture of elaborate deception. In what purported to be the library, leather-bound volumes filled mahogany shelves, yet closer examination revealed them to be theatrical props, hollow spines concealing empty space, their gold lettering spelling nonsense titles in languages that existed only in the imagination of some scenic designer. The discovery that transformed our understanding came in the supposed morning room, where Holmes's attention was drawn to a portrait hanging above the mantelpiece. The painting depicted a distinguished lady of perhaps 40 years, her aristocratic bearing enhanced by the silver-headed walking stick that rested against her chair. Yet it was not the subject that commanded Holmes's interest, but the signature in the lower corner. Victoria Ashford, Holmes read aloud, his voice carrying that particular satisfaction I had learned to associate with breakthrough moments. Observe the date. Watson painted merely 6 months past, yet purporting to show the Viscountess Vale in her prime. He examined the room's other appointments with renewed intensity. Note the careful arrangement of personal effects, a lady's gloves positioned just so upon the writing desk, correspondence scattered with studied casualness, even a partially completed piece of embroidery left as if interrupted by urgent business. The brass key from Fairfax's quarters fitted perfectly into a small escritoire that dominated one corner of the fabricated morning room. Within its drawers lay the anatomy of conspiracy, detailed plans of the Adelphi Theatre's underground spaces, correspondence with Henderson regarding mechanical specifications, and, most damning of all, a leather-bound ledger recording payments to various accomplices, including R. Morse theatrical consultation and T. Hartwell structural modifications. Holmes lifted the pripens. Final item from the escritoire's secret compartment, a daguerreotype showing Julian Fairfax in intimate conversation with a woman whose face had been carefully scratched away, leaving only the distinctive outline of her silver-headed walking stick. On the photograph's reverse, written in Fairfax's familiar hand, were the words, My beloved Victoria, until death do us part. We have been pursuing a phantom, Watson, Holmes declared, his grey eyes meeting mine across the fabricated elegance of our surroundings. The Viscountess Vale exists only in the imagination of someone who required an aristocratic identity to facilitate this elaborate charade. The question now becomes not who she is, but who she was before assuming this carefully constructed persona. He moved to the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the gaslight filtering through the fog. Someone with intimate knowledge of both theatrical operations and aristocratic society has created this elaborate fiction. The real Victoria, for that name, appears genuine, possesses the resources to commission specialized apparatus, the connections to access the theater's inner workings, and the ruthlessness to eliminate witnesses who threaten her design. The implications struck with devastating clarity as Holmes pocketed the key evidence. Our adversary had demonstrated not merely criminal ingenuity, but the sophisticated understanding of both high society and theatrical craft necessary to maintain such an elaborate deception. The game had indeed changed from puzzle to deadly hunt, and somewhere in London's fog-shrouded streets, the real puppet master awaited our next move. Our return journey from the fabricated grandeur of Eaton Square carried with it the weight of revelation, each clip of our hansom's wheels upon the cobblestones marking time toward what I sensed would be the crucial confrontation of our investigation. Holmes sat in contemplative silence, the brass key turning between his fingers like a talisman of truth, his grey eyes reflecting the passing gaslight with that particular intensity I had learned to associate with moments when scattered evidence finally coalesced into coherent understanding. The Adelphi Theatre welcomed us with its familiar atmosphere of controlled chaos, yet something in the very air seemed charged with anticipation. Mr. Ashford awaited us in his office, his usually composed theatrical bearing betrayed by hands that trembled slightly as he arranged papers upon his desk. Holmes wasted no time on pleasantries, placing before the manager the daguerreotype, the forged visiting card, and the portrait bearing the signature Victoria Ashford, with methodical precision. "You will oblige me, Mr. Ashford," Holmes began with characteristic directness, "by explaining the connection between yourself and the woman who has orchestrated this elaborate deception under the guise of the Viscountess Vale. The surname cannot be mere coincidence, and your reaction upon seeing these items suggests recognition you have thus far withheld." The theatrical manager's composure crumbled like a poorly constructed stage flat. His face grew ashen, and for several moments he struggled to find words, his lips moving soundlessly as though rehearsing lines for a role he had hoped never to play. Miss Pembroke, who had remained at the theatre despite the late hour, moved to stand behind his chair with obvious concern. "Victoria is my sister," Ashford finally admitted, the words emerging with the pain of long-suppressed truth. "My younger sister, possessed of remarkable intelligence and artistic talent, who studied mechanical engineering at a Swiss academy before scandal forced her return to London society some 15 years past. She had formed an attachment to a married gentleman of prominence, and when the affair became public knowledge, she vanished rather than face the destruction of her reputation." Holmes leaned forward with that keen attention that indicated crucial information was being revealed. "Her relationship with Mr. Fairfax?" "They were acquainted before his marriage," Ashford continued, his voice growing stronger as the confession progressed. "Victoria had genuine affection for both Julian and his late wife Margaret, whom she met during their brief courtship. When Margaret died of consumption, Victoria sent flowers to the funeral, though she did not attend personally. I suspected she had maintained some correspondence with Julian during his grief, but I never imagined the extent of her involvement in his circumstances." The pieces of our puzzle were falling into place with satisfying precision. Holmes produced the leather-bound ledger from his coat, opening it to the page detailing payments to various accomplices. "The funds for these elaborate preparations, they came from your sister's resources. She began sending money months ago," Ashford admitted, with obvious reluctance. "Substantial sums, insisting I use them for theater improvements and maintenance. I accepted them gratefully, never questioning their source or her motives. If she used my letterhead to forge authorization for repairs, I bear responsibility for providing her the means. Holmes rose and moved to examine the office's appointments with renewed interest, his trained eye noting details that had escaped previous observation. Upon Ashford's desk lay samples of theatre, stationery, and scattered among the usual correspondence were several letters bearing that distinctive feminine script we had encountered throughout our investigation. The mechanical apparatus required considerable expertise to design and implement, Holmes observed, returning his attention to the manager. Your sister's engineering education would have provided the necessary knowledge, but the installation required additional assistance. The rope work shows evidence of maritime, training sailors clove hitches over running bowlines, executed with professional precision. Miss Pembroke stepped forward with obvious reluctance. There is a member of our fly crew, Mr. Holmes Abel Pike, formerly of Her Majesty's Navy. He was discharged 2 winters past and hired for his familiarity with rigging and rope work. He has been absent since yesterday's matinee call, claiming illness, though several of the company noted his nervous behavior in recent days. The final pieces of the conspiracy revealed themselves with crystalline clarity. Holmes examined the physical evidence once more, the chalk dust on the rope fragments, the machine lubricant traces, the precise positioning of the bloodstain, all speaking of careful preparation by individuals with both theatrical knowledge and mechanical expertise. Your sister conceived an elaborate rescue, Holmes announced, his voice carrying that particular satisfaction I had learned to associate with complete understanding. Fairfax, consumed by grief and perhaps facing financial difficulties following his wife's medical expenses, required liberation from his circumstances. Victoria devised a theatrical disappearance that would allow him to assume a new identity, free from debt and sorrow. He moved to the window overlooking the fog-shrouded street, his tall frame silhouetted against the gaslight. The plan required precise timing, mechanical ingenuity, and absolute secrecy. Pike provided the nautical expertise for rigging modifications, while Morse, perhaps unknowingly, supplied the theatrical timing necessary for the deception. When Hartwell's knowledge threatened exposure, he was eliminated with ruthless efficiency. Inspector Gregson, who had arrived during our conference, examined the evidence with growing understanding. The attack upon Morse suggests he learned something that made him dangerous to the conspiracy. Indeed, Holmes replied grimly. The note, promising a final performance, indicates Victoria's intention to complete her design, despite the increasing danger of discovery. She lacks this key. He held up the brass mechanism, which renders Henderson's apparatus dangerous to operate. She will therefore seek alternative means to conclude her drama. Holmes turned to address our assembled company with renewed urgency. We must transform the theatre itself into our trap. Mr. Ashford, announce a closed technical rehearsal for midnight tonight, ostensibly to test the restored stage effects. Ensure that word spreads through the usual theatrical channels that Henderson's apparatus will be collected by wagon from the Maiden Lane entrance at 1 o'clock. Victoria's network of accomplices will carry this intelligence to her, and desperation will compel her to act. The brass keys seemed to pulse with significance in Holmes's palm as he contemplated the approaching confrontation. We shall arrange the stage precisely as on the fatal Paul's night. I will take Fairfax's position behind the tapestry, while you, Watson, will monitor the understage access with constables in support. Inspector Gregson's men will occupy the fly galleries above, and Miss Pembroke will operate the stage cues exactly as before. I felt compelled to voice my concerns. Holmes, you propose to make yourself the target for someone who has already demonstrated a willingness to commit murder. That familiar, sardonic smile touched his features. My dear Watson, the greatest danger lies not in confronting our adversary, but in allowing her to escape with Julian Fairfax to continue this deadly masquerade elsewhere. Besides, I shall not face her unprepared. The brass key represents her only means of safely operating Henderson's mechanism. Without it, any attempt to use the apparatus becomes perilous to both operator and subject. As we disperse to make our preparations, the theatre seemed to draw breath like some great sleeping beast, awakening for its most crucial performance. The crimson tapestry hung like a curtain to destiny itself, while beneath the stage, the modified boards waited to reveal their secrets. Holmes stood for a moment in contemplative silence, the gaslight casting his aquiline profile in sharp relief against the surrounding shadows. "The grave beneath the stage lights," he murmured, his voice carrying that philosophical tone I had learned to associate with moments of profound understanding, "was never intended to remain empty. We shall discover whether it claims another victim, or whether justice finally illuminates the darkness that has shrouded this elaborate deception." The game was indeed afoot, and somewhere in London's fog-shrouded maze, Victoria Ashford prepared for her final, desperate performance. The midnight hour descended upon the Adelphi Theatre like the final curtain of some cosmic drama, transforming the familiar stage into an arena where truth and deception would meet in their ultimate confrontation. Holmes positioned himself behind the crimson tapestry with that characteristic precision I had observed countless times. His tall frame concealed within the exact space where Julian Fairfax had vanished 3 nights prior. The brass key rested securely in his waistcoat pocket, its weight serving as both protection and bait for the elaborate trap we had constructed with such meticulous care. From my position beneath the stage, I could observe the modified floorboards through carefully selected gaps in the wooden framework, while Inspector Gregson's constables occupied strategic positions throughout the theatre's labyrinthine passages. The very air seemed charged with anticipation. Each settling timbers creak and November winds whisper against the windows, marking inexorable time toward our expected confrontation. Miss Pembroke maintained her vigil at the prompt box, her face pale but resolute, ready to execute the precise timing that would spring our carefully laid trap. The first indication of approaching danger came as distant church bells announced midnight, their bronze voices echoing through London's fog-shrouded streets. A soft scraping sound resonated from the Maiden Lane entrance, followed by measured footsteps moving with deliberate stealth through the theatre's backstage corridors. Holmes had predicted correctly Victoria Ashford's desperation would compel her to attempt recovery of Henderson's apparatus, despite the obvious risks that surrounded such an endeavor. Through the gaps between floorboards, I observed 2 figures emerge into the understage area, moving with surprising coordination despite the confined space and uncertain lighting. The woman wore her characteristic heavy veil, yet her movements displayed none of the frailty suggested by her theatrical limp, revealing instead the controlled grace of someone with genuine mechanical expertise. Behind her followed Abel Pike, his sailor's build unmistakable even in the theatre's half-light, his movements betraying the nervous tension of a man who understood the deadly stakes of their enterprise. Victoria's voice carried clearly through the confined space as she examined Henderson's mechanical apparatus with professional assessment. "The counterweight system shows signs of interference," she observed, her tone betraying none of the aristocratic affectation that had characterized her previous disguised communications. "Someone has tampered with the safety mechanisms, though the primary functions remain operational." Her hands moved with practiced confidence among the pulleys and cables, revealing the engineering education that had made this entire conspiracy possible. Pike's response carried the growing anxiety that had infected their partnership since the murders began. "The constables watch every corner, Miss Victoria, and that Detective Holmes suspects far more than he reveals. Perhaps we should abandon this enterprise and seek immediate passage to the continent before the net closes entirely around us." His maritime training was evident in the precise knots he tied as he adjusted the rigging, yet his voice betrayed the fear of a man who had witnessed the deadly consequences of their elaborate deception. "Abandonment is not an option," Victoria replied with steely determination that brooked no argument. "Julian waits in the chamber we prepared beneath these very boards, and every moment of delay increases his danger exponentially." The apparatus will function adequately for our purposes, key or no key, though the operation carries significantly greater risk without proper safeguards. Her words confirmed what Holmes had deduced. Through careful observation, Fairfax remained alive, though concealed in circumstances that grew more perilous with each passing hour. Above us, Holmes maintained his position behind the tapestry with admirable patience, yet I detected subtle movements that suggested his preparation for immediate action. The stage boards creaked almost imperceptibly as Victoria tested the modified sections, her engineering knowledge allowing accurate assessment of the mechanism's condition despite inadequate lighting and the pressure of their desperate circumstances. The critical moment arrived as Victoria attempted to activate Henderson's device manually, her hands working with practiced precision among the complex arrangement of pulleys, cables, and counterweights. Pike positioned himself at stage level, ready to assist with the apparatus's operation from above, while Victoria remained below to monitor the mechanical functions and ensure proper timing. This arrangement placed them at maximum disadvantage should Holmes choose to act, yet their desperation left them little choice in positioning. The sound that shattered our tense anticipation was not the expected operation of Henderson's mechanism, but Victoria's sharp intake of breath as she discovered something that filled her with obvious alarm. "The access chamber," she whispered urgently to Pike. "Someone has sealed the secondary entrance with fresh timber and iron brackets. Julian cannot be moved through the original passage. The route has been deliberately blocked." Holmes seized this moment of confusion with characteristic decisiveness, his voice cutting through the darkness with unmistakable authority. "Miss Victoria Ashford, your elaborate performance concludes tonight. Step away from the apparatus and surrender the weapons you carry." He emerged from behind the tapestry with fluid grace, the brass key gleaming in his palm like a talisman of justice finally revealed. The confrontation that followed stripped away the theatrical disguises that had concealed the true nature of our adversary. Victoria straightened to her full height, abandoning the pretense of infirmity that had served her deception so well, revealing herself as a woman of considerable intelligence and mechanical expertise whose desperation had led her down a path of violence and elaborate deception. "You possess the key," she acknowledged, her voice carrying grudging respect for Holmes's deductive abilities. "Yet you cannot operate the mechanism without risking Julian's life. The chamber's air supply was calculated for specific timing. Delay means death." Holmes approached with measured steps, his grey eyes never leaving her face as Inspector Gregson's constables emerged from their concealment to surround the area. "Your affection for Mr. Fairfax, while genuine, has led you to commit murder and orchestrate an elaborate charade from which there can be no honorable escape. Thomas Hartwell died for your secrets, and others have suffered for your desperate attempt to rewrite destiny through mechanical ingenuity and theatrical deception." With deliberate ceremony, Holmes inserted the brass key into the mechanism's master control, his movements precise and confident despite the deadly stakes involved. The apparatus responded with well-oiled efficiency, revealing a hidden chamber where Julian Fairfax lay unconscious but breathing, his pale features bearing the effects of prolonged chloroform exposure yet showing no signs of permanent harm. As we lifted him carefully from his mechanical prison, Victoria Ashford watched with an expression that mingled relief at his safety with the bitter knowledge that her elaborate design had ultimately failed. The brass key that had served as both evidence and salvation throughout our investigation had fulfilled its final purpose, unlocking not merely a mechanical device, but the truth behind one of the most ingenious deceptions I had ever witnessed. As Inspector Gregson's men secured both Victoria and Pike, Holmes stood contemplating the intricate apparatus with that philosophical expression I had learned to associate with cases that revealed the complex depths of human motivation and mechanical ingenuity working in dangerous harmony. The restoration of Julian Fairfax to consciousness unfolded with the gradual precision of dawn breaking through London's perpetual fog, his eyes opening first to the familiar gaslight of the Adelphi's stage, then focusing with growing clarity upon the faces of those who had worked so desperately to uncover his fate. Dr. Mortimer administered aromatic spirits with practiced efficiency, while Holmes observed the actor's returning awareness with that keen attention he reserved for moments when final truths might yet be revealed. Victoria Ashford, her wrists now secured by Inspector Gregson's handcuffs, watched from her position between two constables, her expression bearing the mingled relief and despair of a gambler whose final card has been played to devastating effect. "Victoria," Fairfax whispered, his voice hoarse from prolonged chloroform exposure, yet carrying unmistakable affection despite their desperate circumstances. "I told you the plan was too dangerous, that innocent people would suffer for our attempt to escape my circumstances." He struggled to sit upright, accepting my steadying hand with grateful acknowledgement. "When Hartwell discovered our preparations, I begged you to abandon the enterprise entirely." Holmes knelt beside the recovering actor, his grey eyes reflecting both satisfaction at successful resolution and genuine curiosity about the human motivations that had driven such elaborate deception. "Mr. Fairfax, your cooperation suggests willing participation rather than victimization. The evidence indicates a conspiracy of remarkable sophistication, requiring coordination between multiple participants, each playing their role with theatrical precision." He rose and moved to examine the intricate apparatus one final time, his appreciation for its mechanical ingenuity evident despite the criminal purposes it had served. "Allow me to resolve our drama completely, for here all strands converge." 6 days before the disappearance, forged orders on Mr. Ashford's letterhead instructed Hartwell to splice the tapestry rope, permitting a concealed line to be diverted to Henderson's apparatus. "The sword used in your final performance contained a hollow reservoir within its pommel, designed to release blood upon command through these green glass vials, creating the illusion of mortal combat without inflicting actual harm." Victoria spoke with quiet dignity, despite her defeat, her voice carrying none of the aristocratic affectation that had characterized her disguised communications. Julian faced ruin at the hands of moneylenders who cared nothing for his grief or artistic contributions. My engineering knowledge suggested a solution that would allow him to vanish completely and assume a new identity in America, where his debts could not follow. Her words revealed the educated precision of someone accustomed to solving complex problems through mechanical ingenuity. Holmes held up the brass key that had served as both evidence and salvation throughout our investigation. This key operated the master control for the entire apparatus. Behind the tapestry, Mr. Seconded, Morse maintained the illusion of combat, while a prearranged cue signaled your descent through the modified boards into Henderson's padded chamber. The chloroform ensured your unconscious cooperation during horizontal transport through the theater's substructure to a predetermined recovery location. The detective's voice carried that particular gravity I had. Learned to associate with cases revealing the complex interplay between human desperation and criminal sophistication. The Viscountess Vale persona, complete with the fabricated residence in Eaton Square, was brilliant misdirection, designed to throw suspicion toward aristocratic circles immune to ordinary police methods. Yet, vanity betrayed you, the signed portrait, the heraldic pins, the distinctive perfume that lingered like a signature you never imagined a detective would read. Inspector Gregson stepped forward with formal gravity. "Victoria Ashford, Abel Pike, you are charged with the murder of Thomas Hartwell and conspiracy to commit fraud. Mr. Fairfax, your willing participation makes you accessory to these crimes, though the court may consider your desperate circumstances as mitigation." Fairfax covered his face with trembling hands. "I believed no one would be harmed, that I would slip away until the scandal burned itself out. When Margaret died, the stage became a grave I trod nightly." He looked at Victoria with despairing tenderness. "You should not have killed for me." She closed her eyes, theatrical bravado falling away like a discarded mask. I would have engineered the world itself, if it meant you might breathe without pain. Holmes pocketed the brass key with characteristic precision, his expression carrying philosophical weight. Your love, Miss Ashford, possessed the precision of Swiss clockwork and the blindness of Tempest. You constructed titled personas, furnished houses like stage sets, and scattered heraldic tokens with artistic vision. Yet mechanism, without morality, proves merely a faster descent into darkness. As Inspector Gregson's constables prepared to escort the conspirators from the theatre, the November fog seemed to lift from both London's streets and the oppressive atmosphere that had shrouded this case of elaborate deception and tragic consequences. The grey dawn light struggled through the Adelphi Theatre's grimy windows as Inspector Gregson's constables led Victoria Ashford and Abel Pike into the fog-shrouded streets, their figures disappearing like actors exiting a stage they would never grace again. Julian Fairfax, still pale from chloroform exposure but steady enough to provide his statement, followed under careful supervision, his theatrical career forever altered by this final, unintended performance. The crimson tapestry hung motionless in the still air, no longer concealing mechanical apparatus or deadly secrets, while Henderson's dismantled device lay scattered across the boards like the remnants of some elaborate stage effect whose purpose had been tragically fulfilled. Holmes stood examining the brass key one final time, its intricate teeth catching the weak morning light that filtered through London's perpetual haze. The mechanical precision was flawless. "Watson," he observed, his voice carrying that philosophical tone I had learned to associate with cases, revealing the complex intersection of human ingenuity and criminal purpose. Every component functioned exactly as designed, from the counterweighted descent system to the horizontal transport mechanism. Yet the human element introduced variables that no engineering calculation could anticipate. As we prepared to depart, Mr. Ashford approached with the bearing of a man whose world had been fundamentally altered by his sister's actions. His usual theatrical composure had entirely abandoned him, replaced by genuine grief for both the victims of Victoria's desperation and the brilliant mind that had conceived such elaborate deception. Miss Pembroke remained loyally beside him, her devotion transcending the scandal that would inevitably follow when the morning papers learned of the night's revelations. Our hansom cab bore us through streets where November's fog was finally beginning to lift, each gas lamp marking our progress toward the comfortable sanctuary of Baker Street. Holmes sat in contemplative silence, occasionally turning the brass key between his fingers as he processed the final implications of our investigation. "You asked, what first aroused my suspicions, Watson," he said at length. "It was the boots standing upright within the heap of clothing, as if the man had evaporated rather than collapsed. No man faints into his boots. He steps out of them, or is drawn from them, mechanically. I found myself reflecting upon the human tragedy that had driven such mechanical ingenuity toward criminal ends. Her affection for Fairfax appeared genuine, Holmes, yet it led her to commit murder without apparent remorse. Love, corrupted by desperation, Watson, becomes indistinguishable from obsession," Holmes replied, his grey eyes reflecting the passing streetlights. Victoria Ashford possessed formidable intelligence and genuine engineering genius. She saw Fairfax's ruin as a mechanical problem requiring a mechanical solution, overlooking entirely the human cost of her elaborate design. The Viscountess Vale persona, complete with the fabricated residence in Eaton Square, represented brilliant misdirection. Yet vanity betrayed her the signed portrait, the heraldic pins, the distinctive perfume that lingered like a signature she never imagined a detective would read. Mrs. Hudson's welcoming lamp glowed through our sitting-room window as our cab drew to its familiar halt, promising the restoration of domestic tranquility after nights of theatrical deception and mechanical conspiracy. The morning papers would soon carry sensational accounts of the Adelphi Theatre mystery, though I suspected the full complexity of the case would remain beyond their comprehension. As we ascended the 17 steps to our chambers, Holmes offered his final observation on the case that had tested both his deductive abilities and his understanding of human motivation. The grave beneath the stage lights was intended to remain forever empty. Watson, a mechanical tomb, from which Julian Fairfax would emerge reborn into new identity and circumstances. Instead, it became the means by which justice illuminated deception and revealed truth. He placed the brass key among the souvenirs of our investigations, where it would serve as a reminder that no deception, however elaborate or mechanically precise, could withstand the methodical application of logical deduction and careful observation. Science in service of deception becomes merely another form of stagecraft, he concluded, settling into his chair with characteristic precision, impressive in execution, yet ultimately hollow in purpose. The case of the grave beneath the stage lights had reached its final curtain, leaving only the satisfaction of justice served and the enduring partnership that had once again triumphed over the most ingenious criminal design conceived in the fog-shrouded maze of Victorian London.